Just 3 minutes. That was all that remained before the east gate of the White House would open. Guests were already moving toward the security checkpoint in small groups. Secret Service agents stood in formation, metal detectors, black steel barricades. Everything ran with the kind of precision that left no room for mistakes. Brandon straightened his tie before glancing over at me. Nicole. Today, don't wander off. Stay close to me. Otherwise, you'll never make it through those gates. My mother laughed. Brandon's right. Just follow him. This isn't the kind of place for people who insist on doing things their own way. A few relatives smiled in agreement. None of them noticed. My hand tightening around a small black velvet box inside my purse. I'd carried it with me for nearly 20 years, and I'd made myself one promise. I wouldn't open it until everything was finally over. Next group, a Secret Service agent called out. The line started moving. Brandon stepped forward, still wearing that same effortless confidence. This invitation. I waited a long time to get it. Then he looked back at me with a smug grin. Let's hope they let you in. Out of pity. A few quiet laughs followed. I didn't answer. I simply looked toward the gates as they slowly began to open. 3 weeks earlier, while my family was raising their glasses to celebrate Brandon's invitation to the White House, my phone vibrated. An email. No logo, no congratulations, just one sentence. Your attendance has been confirmed. Sender, White House Military Office. I read it, locked my phone, and never told a soul. That's why. Even now, my family still believed they were the reason I'd be walking through those gates. The truth was, the person waiting for me on the other side had never even heard of Brandon. My name is Nicole Turner. I'm 38 years old. I've served in the United States Army for nearly 2 decades. Most of what I've done, I can't talk about, and over the years, my family quietly convinced themselves that I'd never really accomplished anything worth remembering. They knew Brandon showed up at political fundraisers. They knew he shook hands with influential people. They knew he'd been invited to the White House, but no one ever asked why I'd missed almost every holiday for 20 years. Or why, every time I called home, I always said the exact same thing. I'm okay. Up ahead, the gates began to swing open. A military officer in full dress uniform stepped outside. His eyes swept across the waiting crowd. Then, he walked straight toward me. Narrative whisper. If you've ever been judged because no one could see the sacrifices you made in silence, stay with me. Sometimes, one single moment is all it takes to change the way the world sees a person. Light sight, turn 0 file 0. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. It looked exactly the way I remembered. The maple trees in the front yard, the old porch swing. Almost nothing had changed, except me. I'd lived through nearly 20 years in the Army. The moment I stepped inside, my mother called out, Nicole. Perfect timing. Can you help me carry a few boxes out to the car? I nodded. Sure. In the kitchen, Brandon was holding court, walking everyone through tomorrow's schedule. There'll be a few senators there. I might even get a chance to shake hands with the White House Chief of Staff. Every sentence pulled the room in. My father smiled. You've always known how to work a room. Definitely didn't get that from me. Everyone laughed. No one noticed. I was still outside, hauling every box to the car by myself. When I came back inside for another load, my eyes drifted to the family photo wall. It was the same wall Mom had decorated for years. A picture of Brandon's college graduation, Brandon accepting an award, Brandon at a charity fundraiser, Brandon fishing with Dad, birthday photos, Christmas photos. I quietly studied each frame. Then I started looking for one of me. Just one. But there wasn't one. I stepped closer, looked again, still nothing. It wasn't because there wasn't enough space. It was because no one had ever thought to put me there, and in that moment, I understood something. Maybe I'd never really disappeared from this family. I'd simply never been placed where anyone thought to look. Nicole, Brandon's voice pulled me back. He held out his suit jacket. Can you press this for me? I don't want a single wrinkle tomorrow. I took it. Of course. He smiled, then turned right back to the conversation everyone else was listening to. No one thought there was anything unusual about it, just like they hadn't for years. Somehow, everyone had quietly accepted that I would always be the one working behind the scenes. By late afternoon, I packed my bag and got ready to head back to the hotel. As I reached the door, my mother called after me. Tomorrow, ride with the family. Don't go wandering off, and when we get there, just stay with Brandon. I don't want you getting lost. I smiled. I will. No one in that room knew that tomorrow morning, I wouldn't be staying with them for very long, because beyond the east gate of the White House, someone else was already waiting to receive me. As I walked toward my car, my fingers brushed against the velvet box inside my purse. It was still there, quiet, unchanged, just like the promise I'd been carrying for the past 20 years. Cliffhanger that night. Just after I got back to the hotel, my phone buzzed. A short message from the White House military office appeared on the screen. Escort officer has been assigned. Arrival confirmed. 0830. My phone buzzed only once. I opened the message. Escort officer has been assigned. Arrival confirmed. 0830. No congratulations. No official seal. No polished formalities. Just a brief notification. Exactly the way the military communicates. I locked my phone, set it on the nightstand, then unzipped my garment bag. My dress uniform hung perfectly pressed. Not a single wrinkle. My fingers traced the shoulder boards, the ribbons, the insignia, the quiet record of nearly 20 years in uniform. Every piece told the story of a different chapter, a different mission, a different person, or a different price. But there was one thing, none of them could ever explain: how many times I'd smiled at my family, and simply said, "I'm fine." The next morning, the whole family gathered in the hotel lobby. Brandon arrived in a tailored navy suit. Mom straightened his tie with both hands. Dad brushed an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder. "There you go, you represent this family today." Brandon smiled with quiet confidence. Right then, the elevator doors opened. I stepped out, wearing my dress uniform. The lobby fell silent, just for a few seconds. Brandon looked me up and down, then he laughed. "So you're actually wearing it?" "Yeah, I thought you were joking last night." He walked over and lowered his voice. "Nicole, everyone invited today is wearing a suit. You're going to stand out. And not in a good way." I calmly adjusted my cuff. "It's fine, this is the proper uniform for my assignment." He shrugged. "Your choice. Just don't blame me when people start staring." I didn't answer, because I knew they would stare, just not for the reason Brandon imagined. The motorcade stopped outside the east gate of the White House. Groups of guests stepped out one after another, beyond the security barriers. Secret Service agents worked alongside military police, screening every visitor. Brandon walked several steps ahead. "Stay together, don't get separated." He kept reminding everyone. Only a few yards remained before the security checkpoint, when a military officer in full dress uniform appeared. He scanned the line. His eyes passed over Brandon, then my parents. Before stopping, on me, he walked straight over, came to attention, and rendered a crisp salute. "Good morning, Colonel Turner. I'm Major Harris. I've been assigned as your escort today." Brandon froze. My mother instinctively reached for my father's arm. As for me, I returned the salute. "Good morning, Major." "Thank you." Major Harris inclined his head. "This way, ma'am." He gestured toward a separate entrance. No waiting line, no tourists, only military personnel, and members of the ceremonial staff standing by. Behind me, I heard Brandon's voice. "Nicole." But this time, I couldn't go with them anymore. Cliffhanger. Just before we entered the military access corridor, a Secret Service agent stepped forward, checked my credentials, then immediately spoke into his radio. "Colonel Turner is here. The military office has been notified." "Colonel Turner is here. The military office has been notified." The Secret Service agent's voice was calm as it came through his radio. A second later, the side gate quietly swung open. Two service members in dress uniform stepped outside. One held the door, the other walked straight toward me. "Welcome back, Colonel. General Miller is expecting you." I gave a small nod. "Thank you." Behind me, I could feel my entire family staring. No one said a word. Brandon was the first to break the silence. "Wait, there has to be some mistake. My sister's with us." He held up his invitation. "This is an official White House invitation." The agent glanced at it politely. "Yes, sir. Your invitation is completely valid. Please continue through the guest entrance." Brandon frowned. "What about my sister?" The agent offered a courteous smile. "Colonel Turner isn't attending as a guest. She has her own schedule." Just one sentence. That was all it took, and Brandon's world seemed to stop turning. My father looked at me. "Nicole, you work with them?" I answered with a single word. "Yes, nothing more, nothing less." That was still the limit of what I was allowed to say. Major Harris stepped forward. "Colonel, if you're ready, we should head inside." I turned back toward my family. My mother was still frozen in disbelief. Brandon gripped his invitation so tightly it had begun to bend. His eyes kept shifting, from me, to the private entrance beyond the gate. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he realized something. Some doors can't be opened with an invitation, they can't be opened with connections, and they certainly can't be opened just because you know the right people. I followed Major Harris inside. The white stone walkway leading toward the military wing was noticeably quieter than the public entrance. The conversations disappeared, the tourists were gone. Only the steady rhythm of polished shoes echoed across the stone. After we'd walked a short distance, an Air Force colonel approached from the opposite direction. He stopped, smiled. "Nicole, it's been a long time. General Miller told me you'd be here today." We shook hands. "It's good to see you again, sir." He nodded. "You've earned today." Then he continued on his way. No one introduced me. No one explained who I was. They simply already knew. Beyond the security fence, Brandon hadn't moved. From where he stood, all he could see was one officer after another stopping to greet me. Senior officers, commanders, people he'd never met, and in that moment, I think he finally began to understand, a person's worth isn't measured by how many people know their name, it's measured by the respect of the people who truly understand what they've done. Cliffhanger. We stopped in front of the large wooden doors leading into the ceremonial hall. Major Harris reached over and straightened a small fold in my uniform, then he lowered his voice. Colonel, just like always, we won't be talking about what you did. He paused, but everyone in that room already knows. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me. The noise from outside disappeared almost instantly. The grand hall settled into the familiar silence of military ceremony. The American flag stood behind the stage. The front rows were filled with generals, senior officers, and federal officials. No one spoke above a whisper, only the occasional turn of a page, or a quiet greeting between people who had spent years serving together. Major Harris led me to a seat in the second row. General Miller will be presiding over this portion of the ceremony. Congratulations, Colonel. Thank you. He smiled, then quietly stepped away. I glanced over my shoulder, nearly 100 feet away. I could see my family seated in the guest section. Brandon still hadn't taken his eyes off me. The confidence was gone, so was the smug smile. All that remained was confusion. Maybe even now, he still couldn't understand why so many senior officers already knew my name. The lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies stepped to the podium. After a brief introduction, he opened a dark blue folder. The next individual is being recognized for extraordinary service to the United States of America. Colonel Nicole Turner. I rose, smoothed the front of my uniform, and walked toward the stage, not too fast, not too slow, just as I'd done through countless military ceremonies over the years. The presenter looked down at the citation. He paused for several seconds, then he looked back up. Normally, this is where we summarize the accomplishments of each honoree. But in Colonel Turner's case, the majority of her service remains classified. The room fell completely silent. He closed the folder and read only one sentence. For extraordinary service to the United States of America. Nothing more. No stories, no list of missions, no operation names, no locations, just a single line. But inside that room, no one needed an explanation. The applause came all at once. Every person in the hall rose to their feet, not out of curiosity, but out of understanding. Because everyone there knew that behind the missions no one could ever discuss were years of sacrifices that could never be put into words. General Miller placed the medallion in my hands. Then he shook my hand firmly, leaning in just enough for only me to hear. He said, "Welcome home, Colonel." A small smile crossed my face. "Thank you, sir." Just 4 words, yet they carried me back to every place I'd ever served. Remote bases, flights into places I couldn't name, deployments with no return date, and every short phone call home that always ended the same way. "I'm okay." As I turned to leave the stage, my eyes found my father. He was still standing, his eyes glistened, but he wasn't clapping. Not because he didn't want to, because he was trying to understand what kind of life his daughter had been living for the past 20 years. Narrative whisper. Some people can never tell you what they did, but the way others rise to honor them says everything that words never could. Cliffhanger. As the ceremony came to an end, a group of generals and senior officers began walking toward me together. The man in front smiled and extended his hand. "Colonel Turner, there are a few people here who've been hoping to see you again." Colonel Turner, there are several people here who've been hoping to see you again. The moment General Miller finished speaking, a group of senior officers walked toward us. The first was an Air Force Brigadier General. He smiled warmly. "It's been a long time. I still remember the operation we worked on together." I shook his hand. "It's good to see you again, sir." A Navy admiral standing beside him chuckled. "I honestly thought you'd find a way to hide in the last row again." I smiled. Old habits. The entire group laughed. It wasn't polite laughter. It was the kind shared by people who had once trusted each other with their lives. Across the hall, Brandon remained in the guest section. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he could see it. One after another, people kept walking over to me. A lieutenant general, the national security advisor, a senior official from the Department of Defense. No introductions. None were necessary. Every one of them already knew my name. "Nicole, Colonel Turner. Good to see you again." They greeted me like someone they'd known for years. Brandon swallowed hard. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he realized that being famous and being respected were never the same thing. My father still hadn't moved. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to join the conversation. He simply watched. Then his eyes settled on something so small, almost no one else would have noticed. Every time another officer shook my hand, they looked me directly in the eye. There was no forced politeness, no attempt to impress, just the quiet respect, reserved for someone they had served beside. Someone they trusted completely. My father had never seen anyone look at me that way. Not until today. A few minutes later, the crowd began to thin. I walked back toward my family. No one spoke. Brandon finally broke the silence. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. They all know you? I nodded. Some of them. He looked down at his shoes, then let out a small bitter laugh. I always thought, if you wanted people to respect you, you had to make sure everyone knew your name. I met his eyes. No, there are jobs where the more people who know your name, the more likely you've failed. Brandon slowly looked back up. For the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't try to prove he was right. He simply stood there, thinking about what I'd said. Just then, my father walked over. He stopped in front of me, opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, then closed it again. Finally, he reached up and gently straightened the insignia on my collar, the same way he'd adjusted Brandon's tie that morning. It was such a small gesture, but I could feel his hand trembling. He gave a quiet nod, never said a word, then turned and walked away. I watched him leave, and for the first time in years, I understood something. Some people, when they finally realize they've been wrong, don't know how to begin with the words, "I'm sorry." Cliffhanger. 2 days later, I was back at my unit. The soldier at the front gate approached me. "Colonel, there's a gentleman who's been standing outside the gate for almost an hour. He says, he's your father." 2 days later, I returned to my unit. The gate guard walked over. "Colonel, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's your father." I looked through the guardhouse window. Dad's old pickup truck was still parked beneath the trees. He stood there alone, his hands folded in front of him, his shoulders slightly more stooped than the last time I'd seen him. I walked outside. "Dad." He turned toward me, gave a small nod. "I'm sorry." He stopped, then slowly shook his head. "No, I didn't come here to say that today." "Why not?" He looked through the gates toward the base. "I just wanted to see the place where you've spent your life." I stood quietly for a moment, then turned to the gate guard. "He's with me." We walked down the main road together. Young soldiers passed by. Each one stopped. "Good morning, Colonel." "Morning, ma'am." I returned every greeting. Dad didn't say a word, he simply watched. After a while, he asked softly, "They all know you?" I smiled. "They know my rank. As for the person I am, I still have to earn that every single day." He nodded slowly. Maybe that was something he'd never considered before. We stopped outside the headquarters building. Inside the main hallway, stood a large wall, Hall of Honor. Photographs of service members recognized for exceptional service lined the display. Dad slowed his pace. His eyes moved from one frame to the next. Then, they stopped. Right in the center, was my photograph. Dress uniform, standing at attention. Beneath it, only a few simple words. Colonel Nicole Turner, Distinguished Service. No list of achievements, no mission summaries, no explanation of what I'd done, nothing else. Dad stood there, for a long time, long enough that I lost track of the minutes. Finally, he slowly lifted his hand, but he never touched the frame. It stopped halfway, as though he wasn't sure he had the right. A voice echoed down the hallway. "Colonel Turner." I turned around. "Lieutenant General Anderson." He walked over with a smile, then looked toward my father. "You must be Nicole's father." Dad nodded quietly. The general extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you. She's one of the officers we trust the most. Not just because of her ability," he paused, "but because, when everyone else starts to panic, Nicole is always the last person who loses her composure." Then he looked back at me. "Thank you for everything." With that, he continued down the hall. Nothing more needed to be said. Dad remained where he was. His eyes had turned red. A long silence passed, before he finally spoke. "I always believed what you needed most was for the whole world to know your name." He slowly shook his head. "But today, I finally understand. The greatest honor is being respected by the people who truly understand what you've given." I didn't answer. I simply stood beside him. The two of us, looking at my photograph on the Hall of Honor. For the first time, my father wasn't looking at me as a man trying to figure out his daughter. He was looking at me with respect. Cliffhanger. As we prepared to leave the base, Dad reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a small black velvet box, the very same box he'd seen me carry with me for all those years. He gently placed it in my hands. "I think it's finally time for you to open it." That afternoon, after my father left the base, I returned to my office. The black velvet box was still sitting on my desk. I stared at it for a long time. For nearly 20 years, it had gone everywhere with me, from one duty station to another, across countless flights, into places where my name could never appear on a single document. And yet, it had been years since I'd opened it myself. I lifted the lid. Inside wasn't a medal, or a certificate, or any kind of award, just an old metal nameplate. Turner. The very first name tape I received. The day I put on the uniform for the first time. I turned it over. On the back, written in black marker, was the messy handwriting of an 18-year-old girl. One day, even if no one believes in me, I'll become someone I'm proud of. A small smile found its way across my face. The day I wrote those words, I never imagined I'd one day walk through the gates of the White House. And I certainly never imagined that the hardest part of my journey wouldn't be serving in the military. It would be waiting for my own family to finally see me. I set the old nameplate on my desk, right beside the medallion I'd received that morning. One represented where it all began, the other, how far the road had taken me. 20 years, left to reduce to only a few inches of space. Just then, someone knocked on my door. Come in. It was my father. Maybe he'd forgotten his hat in the truck, but the moment he noticed the nameplate on my desk, he stopped. He walked over slowly, picked it up with both hands. His thumb gently brushed away a thin layer of dust from the worn metal. He studied it for a long time, then carefully placed it back, exactly where it had been. His voice was so quiet, it was almost a whisper. I think this belongs with you. I looked at him. He never said the words that. I'm sorry. He didn't explain. He didn't try to justify the years we'd lost. But in his eyes, I finally saw what I'd been waiting nearly 20 years to find: pride and respect. Before he reached the door, he turned back. Nicole, yeah? From now on, when people ask me how many children I have, I'm not just going to tell them about Brandon anymore. He smiled. I'm going to tell them about the Colonel, who taught me that the greatest people are often the ones who live the quietest lives. I walked over to him, and for the first time, in a very long time, I hugged my father. There was no distance left between us, no silence, just a family that had finally learned how to truly see one another. Narrative whisper. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll remember one thing. A person's worth is never measured by how many people know their name. It's measured by the way they choose to live. That's even when no one is watching. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you again in the next military stories.